A few days later, after finishing all the paperwork, I packed my things and left my in-laws' house. I told my mother-in-law I was leaving today and gave her a polite bow. She glared at me and said, "You've been a terrible wife and mother, from the beginning to the end." Then she accused me of being the worst mother for leaving my kids. I couldn't believe how cruel she was. My kids, Josh and Amy, laughed when they heard what she said. My name is Maria, I'm 42 years old, and I'm a housewife. I live with my husband, Ken, and our 2 kids, Josh and Amy. Our kids are growing up well, and Ken works hard, so everything was peaceful. But things changed recently. My father-in-law passed away, and my mother-in-law moved in with us. Ken, being her only son, felt bad about her being alone, so he decided she would move in without asking me. I always thought he was too attached to his mom, but I didn't expect him to make such a big decision without talking to me. When I objected, he said, "Are you asking me to leave my mom with nowhere to go?" And I had no choice but to agree. After that, it felt like living in a nightmare. My mother-in-law had always disliked me, and now she found every chance to criticize me. "Maria, what's the seasoning for this?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll be more careful. I don't like greasy food." "Well, the kids are growing fast, and Ken likes fried food too. Then just make a separate meal for me. I don't want to eat unhealthy food and die early." "I'd love to, but it would cost more and be a hassle." "That's where you come in. Ken makes enough money, so you should be able to handle the finances. You're so spoiled. When I was young, I did all the housework by myself, no matter how hard it was. It's sad that my grandchildren have to live in a house run by such a lazy mother." I wanted to say, "If you have so much to complain about, why don't you do it?" But I held back because if I said anything, Ken would get really angry with me. At first, I tried to stand up to her, but she would always tell Ken, and then he would yell at me, saying, "How dare you talk to her like that when I'm the one supporting you?" I thought about getting a divorce, but as a stay-at-home mom, I couldn't take care of the kids on my own. They are everything to me, and I didn't want to lose them, so I decided to keep quiet and put up with it. Instead of just enduring it, I started planning for a divorce little by little. I applied for jobs at different companies while my mother-in-law watched me all day. Only one company offered me a part-time position. Thanks to my previous job as a bank clerk, I got a clerical job at a bank. It was my first office job in years, and I actually enjoyed it. Of course, it was stressful and came with a lot of responsibility, but it was much better than being stuck at home with my mother-in-law all the time. But my mother-in-law didn't like that I was working. "Why work when Ken makes enough money? Maybe she's out looking for men. What kind of person thinks like that? She's an idiot," she would say. It's true that Ken makes a good salary, but since his mother moved in, our expenses have gone up, so we're not in a position where we can afford everything. Still, my mother-in-law told me I should give her an allowance for my part-time job, to make sure I wasn't spending it on men. When I refused, saying it wasn't possible, she went straight to Ken. That night, when Ken came home from work, he yelled at me just like before. "Are you having an affair?" "What? No, I'm not. My mother said you're using your part-time salary to pay for men." "I'm not doing that." "Why are you believing her lies? Just stop, then prove you're not guilty by giving her the allowance she wants." "Oh no." Then, my mother-in-law came in, smiling smugly. $500 a month. That much? That's what my mother says, so you need to give it to her. In the end, I couldn't fight them both. I had to give most of the money I earned from my part-time job to my mother-in-law as an allowance. To make things worse, she told the kids, "Your mother is a horrible adulterer," with a smirk on her face. Even my kids, who were in junior high, knew what that meant. It was terrible to lie like that. I felt it was so unfair, and it was ruining my life. Then, something happened that made everything even worse. I found out my husband was having an affair. All along, he had been accusing me of cheating, but it was him the whole time. This pushed me over the edge, and they say when you reach your breaking point, everything just comes pouring out. I didn't want to spend another second with these people, so I went straight to get the divorce papers. "I can't stay in this house after what you've done," I told my husband as I confronted him with the papers. He just laughed and said, "I don't want an old woman like you in my house." I knew he was planning to be with his lover after the divorce. He agreed to pay alimony and divide the property without hesitation. When the kids were asked where they wanted to stay, both of them said they wanted to stay in the house. My mother-in-law glared at me and said, I knew you liked your father more than this woman. A few days later, after completing all the paperwork, I packed my bags and left my in-laws' house. I told my mother-in-law I was leaving that day, bowing to her as a gesture of respect. She smirked and sarcastically said, "You've been a terrible wife and mother from the start." Then she added, "You're such a bad mother to leave your children." I didn't know how she could keep making fun of me. My kids, Josh and Amy, laughed at what she said. "See, even the kids are laughing at you. What a pathetic mother." "Well, actually, the kids chose to stay here, so I'm not abandoning them." "Oh, I see, so you're the sad woman who got abandoned by her children." "Say whatever you want, but remember, from now on, you're the one in charge of everything here. Don't worry about me, unlike you, I can handle everything." "Alright then, I really must be going now." With that, I left my in-laws' house. I went back to my parents' house and threw myself into work. I asked my job to switch me to full-time and took the test to become a full-time employee. Thankfully, I got the position. Now I could take the kids with me, and I knew my mother-in-law would be worn out soon. Sure enough, about 3 months later, my mother-in-law called me. "Maria, help me out." "What's wrong?" "I need to take Josh to his soccer games and even help with training camps during the summer. Plus, I have to make his lunch for morning practice and wash his dirty uniforms every day. Amy also goes to cram school, so I have to drive her there and back every day, and I'm doing all the housework by myself." Ken says he's tired from work and doesn't help at all. If you're just going to complain, I'm hanging up. Wait, I'm calling because I need your help. Sorry, I'm already divorced, so this isn't my problem. Please don't say that. I'm not going back, but I understand that you can't handle everything on your own. I can't trust you with my precious children. I'll take them, that's what they want. What? They want to stay here. They just want you to understand how hard I've been working. What? Yes, when I decided to get a divorce, the first thing I did was talk to the kids. They said they'd stay with you at first. Amy said, "But that means grandmother and the others are just kicking you out." "Right, Mom?" Then Josh said, "I don't like that. We know how hard you work, Mom, so they decided to stay and show you how hard it is to live with you." I was so relieved to know that my kids were on my side. I made up my mind that I would work hard and make enough money to bring them home for good. Well then. Yes, everything went according to plan. I'm now a full-time employee, and I'll take the kids. Oh no. I hired a lawyer and demanded custody. Since the kids wanted to live with me, the court quickly agreed to transfer custody. When I told his boss about the affair, they were shocked. My ex-husband was moved to a department where he wouldn't be able to advance in his career. Because of this, he can no longer afford the mortgage on the house. My ex-mother-in-law was also ordered to get a job, which she hated. She was furious that her son was making decisions for her. Now, my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law are blaming each other. They'll probably have to leave the house, but that's not my concern anymore. As for me, I rented an apartment and moved in with my children. They're growing up to be amazing kids. My daughter cooks, and my son helps with the laundry and cleaning. I want to be able to support them so they can do whatever they want in the future, so I'm going to keep working hard to earn money. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.
I knew my father would be released from jail in about 2 years, but I had surrounded myself with enough support and security that he wouldn't dare approach me again. Finally, I had found peace, a tranquility I hoped to carry with me for the rest of my life. After that horrifying incident, life slowly began to regain its normalcy. About a year later, I found myself immersed in the everyday routines. 6 months after the incident, I met someone special through a dating app, and we grew deeply attached to each other. My business prospered, and everything seemed to fall into place. The police station where my father was incarcerated repeatedly called, urging me to talk to him, to accept his apologies. I paid no heed. After all he had done, second chances weren't something he deserved. Fast forward 2 years, and I found myself getting married to the same wonderful man I had met on the dating platform. My fiancé was everything I had ever wanted. He knew about my past, supported me in every decision, and made it his mission to ensure my happiness and comfort. During the wedding, in the absence of a father to walk me down the aisle, my best friend's father, the man who had welcomed me into their family, did the honor. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward all the incredible people in my life. They had helped me heal and move forward. However, as the celebration continued, we were interrupted by a commotion at the main entrance. Rushing there, I discovered a man attempting to force his way into the wedding uninvited. I instantly recognized him. He was my father. His yelling and curses sent shivers down my spine. When his eyes met mine, he uttered, "My sweet daughter, I wanted to meet you for so long. Come to your father." His words felt like a nightmare, and before I knew it, everything went black and I lost consciousness. Upon waking, my husband was by my side, reassuring me that my father had been taken to a mental hospital. He wasn't mentally well and had been diagnosed with several issues. My husband promised that I would never have to see him again, even suggesting we could relocate if it made me feel safer. The relief I felt at the prospect of never seeing my father again was indescribable. My husband and I moved, and together we ran our businesses. Besides occasional short trips, we mostly worked from home. I had spent my life searching for peace, and finally, I had found it with my new family. Having faced similar challenges with difficult parents, I understand the struggles you've endured. You were never the one at fault in this situation. I hope you always find peace and happiness. Best of luck. Your father's actions were despicable. He deserves to be in jail indefinitely. Who treats their children this way? I'm so glad you've escaped that nightmare, and your father is the only one to blame. Wishing you endless peace and love. Now let's dive into the second story. I am a 25-year-old woman who owns a beautiful 4-bedroom house. I purchased my house when I was 23, after allowing my business partner to take our shared assets in exchange for $600,000. We co-owned several properties, having made our first purchase together when we were 20 and 21 during our dating days. Even though our romantic relationship didn't work out, we remained business partners. Shortly after my 23rd birthday, I closed the deal on my house. At that time, I was only working part-time while managing our properties. Starting with just a few belongings from my old apartment, my new home remained mostly empty for months. My dream was always to become a pastry chef, and a local community college offered a program that allowed you to obtain a certificate for free with 16 weeks of classes. That's where I met my fiancé, James, a 27-year-old chef at a high-end restaurant. We connected instantly, and he became an integral part of my life, even helping me set up my bakery. James proposed to me in Jamaica on August 8, 2022. When we returned home, I moved in with him. I had spent months perfecting recipes in my kitchen, which I meticulously designed to my liking. I often put my phone on Do Not Disturb mode to eliminate distractions. Although James found this upsetting, I stuck to my schedule and rarely deviated from it. About a week ago, I missed several calls from James because my phone was on DND and he couldn't reach me. He suggested having a key to my place for emergencies, but I declined, explaining that I needed time to adjust to living with someone. Recently, I noticed he had a spare key in his car, and I immediately changed the locks with my brother's help. During dinner last night, I confronted James about finding the key. I assured him it was useless now that I had changed the locks. We argued, and we haven't spoken since. Am I being unreasonable? My father cast me out of our home, leaving me to struggle for 4 long years, unjustly blaming me for money stolen from our house. Now he's back, claiming he wants to meet and has an apology to offer along with an enticing proposition. I couldn't help but laugh in his face. I've never liked my father. His past actions are the root cause. Sure, parents scold their children for mistakes, but my father cursed my very existence. After my mother's death, he spiraled into madness, and being his only child, I bore the brunt of his erratic behavior until I turned 18. I was terrified of him. One night, he burst into the living room, accusing me of theft, grabbing me by my hair and throwing me aside. I wept as he hurled insults, insisting I'd stolen from him. I pleaded my innocence, but he wouldn't listen. The argument escalated until he demanded I leave. When I protested, he slapped me once more and cast me out with nothing. No food, water, clothes. I found refuge at my friend's house, whose parents welcomed me with open arms. They became my new family, offering support and shelter. Despite their advice, I didn't report the abuse. Some twisted part of me didn't want to hurt him further. Looking back, I realized I should have taken that step. Now, 4 years later, I'm a successful businesswoman heading a security company. I found myself face to face with my father, who, unbeknownst to him, was about to discover my achievements. He apologized, attributing his actions to his struggle with my mother's death, professing his love and desire for my happiness. I listened silently, waiting for the catch. His proposition came, a job and a share in his small manufacturing company, assuming I was jobless and struggling. I couldn't contain my laughter. In between my fits of laughter, I shared my success story, revealing my thriving business empire. His dumbfounded expression was priceless. As I stood to leave, I warned him never to contact me again, making it clear I wanted him out of my life for good. As I walked away, a smile crept across my face. It was cathartic to release all that pent-up frustration. That man had never truly been a father to me, so finally feeling happy was a welcome change. But at times, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd been too harsh on him. Life continued as usual after that peculiar meeting. Then one day, my father called, his voice tinged with desperation. He begged me to take him in, shedding tears and repeating his apologies. He admitted he shouldn't have treated me so poorly and that I deserved better. His transparent attempt to get a piece of my success wasn't lost on me, so I hung up the call without a second thought. Weeks later, my company had an opening for gatekeepers. I wasn't personally involved in the hiring process, so I didn't pay much attention to it. But as fate would have it, one day while entering the premises, I saw my father working as one of the gatekeepers. My mood soared, knowing he had ulterior motives, but I decided to let it be, as long as he didn't cause any trouble. Late one evening, I was leaving the office building when I noticed him waiting at the door. I initially ignored him, walking toward my car. However, he called out to me with a sad and apologetic expression. He tried to apologize again, but when I declined, he grew visibly angry. He reminded me of the past, the way he used to hit me, and accused me of having the audacity to speak to him this way. I was horrified. Childhood memories flooded back, leaving me frozen. Before I knew it, he was charging toward me, striking me once more. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and some of the security guards rushed to my aid. I shot him a withering look and promptly informed him that he was fired, promising to report the incident to the police. Given my public standing, the police took my complaint seriously, resulting in his imprisonment for about 2 years and hefty fines. I also disclosed the childhood violence to the police, which only exacerbated his punishment. His face haunted my worst nightmares. Just when I thought I had escaped my traumatic past, this incident triggered a flood of memories. I sought therapy to deal with the aftermath of the attack, but therapy sessions helped me cope with panic attacks and anxiety. From that day on, I took personal charge of scrutinizing the profiles of all new recruits in the security department. While this incident had reignited my fears, I did everything in my power to regain a semblance of reassurance. A month after the ordeal, I could sense a slow but steady improvement in myself. The therapy sessions continued, and I began to feel better. Well, it's clear that your fiancé needs to respect your boundaries. However, there seems to be a deeper issue here. If you don't trust him enough to allow him into your safe space, perhaps it's a sign that you both need to reevaluate your relationship. It's crucial to feel comfortable living together, especially if you're planning a future together. Considering your age and the relatively short time you've known each other, it might be a good idea to have an open and honest conversation. Address your feelings, why you feel that way, and discuss how you both can move forward as a couple. Be prepared for him to have his own opinions and emotions about the situation. It appears that the issue here goes beyond just a house key. Everyone sucks here, estate. He shouldn't have made the key without your permission, and you clearly communicated that he didn't have your approval. However, considering you're engaged and living together, it raises concerns about trust in your relationship. Why wouldn't you trust him with a key to your house, especially when he asked for it due to legitimate situations where his lack of access caused problems? Your relationship seems imbalanced, and if this continues, it might soon be one-sided. You might be the one at fault here. Living together and being engaged should signify a level of trust that seems to be lacking in this situation. Do you genuinely believe your engagement will survive after such a significant fight? By the way, if you are enjoying this video and want to be an awesome person, consider hitting the like button. Alternatively, you could go to their house and leave them the last piece of cheesecake. Okay, let's move on to the next story. I'm a 20-year-old sharing a house with 4 roommates, and I had an issue with one of them, Jane, who is a 29-year-old immigrant that moved to our country about 4 years ago for better job opportunities. Jane joined us around 3 months ago to fill in for a previous roommate who left after her lease expired. Jane and I never had any major clashes until this particular problem arose. Jane's family still lives in her native country, which is in a different time zone. She frequently FaceTimes with them when it's late at night for us, usually around 2 or 3 a.m. While she doesn't do this every night, it occurs often enough to be bothersome, around 4 times a week. What's especially irksome is that she engages in these calls in the kitchen or living room, and her conversations with her family are excessively loud. I've spoken to Jane about this issue, suggesting that she be more considerate about the noise and perhaps use headphones. However, she flatly refused, claiming that headphones ruined the experience. I also proposed that she FaceTime during the day, but she argued that her family would be asleep at that time. I asked her to please be quieter because her FaceTiming sessions with her family were waking me up, and I had to get up early for work. While she seemed to understand, she didn't show much enthusiasm for fixing the problem and kept changing the subject. Earlier this week, I had a Zoom interview for an exciting internship that could significantly impact my career. I informed my roommates about it a week in advance to ensure a quiet house for my interview. However, the night before the interview, around midnight, Jane was loudly FaceTiming her family in the living room. I woke up and was clearly upset about it. I asked Jane to keep it down, and she assured me she was just saying goodbye to them. They quieted down for about 10 minutes, but then I could hear them yelling again. I approached Jane again, stressed the importance of my early morning interview, and asked her to please keep it down. She promised she would and apologized. However, around 1 a.m., I was once again awakened by Jane and her family. At this point, I had had enough. I went downstairs and yelled at Jane, telling her to be quiet because some of us were trying to sleep. Her family ended the call when they heard me, and Jane went to her room crying, refusing to talk to me. She said she missed her family and expected more empathy from me. My other roommate sided with Jane, saying I was too harsh. I'm feeling conflicted. I feel guilty for yelling at her, but I'm incredibly frustrated with her for being so disruptive. Not the jerk. It's unacceptable for her to call and wake her family up, yet it's perfectly fine for her to shriek at 1 or 3 a.m. and disturb her roommates. Can't she see the hypocrisy in her behavior? Her statement about headphones ruining the experience was baffling. How can wearing headphones ruin the experience? It's a completely reasonable request, and her refusal makes no sense at all. All right, that wraps up today's stories. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. If you have your own story, feel free to email it to us. The email address is in the description. Alright, until next time.
My father, aged 52, and I, at 25, reside in my mother's ancestral house, an inheritance I received when she passed away from cancer when I was 16. I share the space with my 3-year-old Cocker Spaniel, Moxie. Recently, my father surprised me by marrying his high school sweetheart, Steph, 51, whom he had been in contact with for almost 2 years. They swiftly moved into the house a week after their small wedding, a ceremony to which I was not invited, unaware of their relationship. Steph, along with her twin stepdaughters, Lizzie and Lexi, fake names, both 20, and their 2 chihuahuas, Gucci and Herms, relocated to our home. The twins attend a nearby state college, and my father proposed that they live with us to save on expenses, to which I reluctantly agreed, thinking the spacious 7-bedroom house could accommodate all of us. However, complications arose. Firstly, Steph demanded my room, citing the need for space for her luxury items. I firmly refused, asserting my long-standing claim to the room. A compromise was reached wherein my father offered his closet space to her. Secondly, the twins had a habit of entering rooms without knocking, causing me considerable embarrassment during a work meeting when Lexi, wearing a bikini, barged into my office. Furthermore, their untrained dogs left messes around the house, endangering Moxie, who was often harassed by them. I found her injured one day, prompting my concern for her safety. To aggravate matters, family photos, including those of my grandparents, great-grandparents, my mother's family, and myself, were repeatedly moved without my consent. In a recent incident, Steph replaced these pictures with her own, causing a heated argument between us. She insisted on setting house rules, claiming it was her domain, implying I lacked proper upbringing due to my mother's absence. I could not tolerate her disrespect in my own home. Furious, I confronted her, asserting my ownership of the house, and told her unequivocally that if she and her twins refused to respect my boundaries, they could pack their belongings and leave. I reminded her, "Lady, you are living under my roof," affirming my authority in the situation. "This house is my inheritance from my mother, and at this moment, you, your twins, and your dogs are trespassing. Get out before I call the cops." When my father returned home early that day after Steph told him what transpired, I explained my perspective. It was mentioned that they were still adjusting to the house, and the move had been challenging for them. I shared all the issues I had been facing, but my father insisted that things would improve if we gave them time. I had endured their behavior and reached my limit. I firmly stated that enough was enough. He continued to defend them, so I made a decision. I told him he could either move out with them or stay. But he had until the end of the week to make his choice. Did I do the right thing by forcing my dad to choose between me and his new family? I had given them a chance, but disrespecting my mother's memory in the house where we both grew up was my breaking point. The top comments before reading the updates were overwhelmingly supportive of my decision. "Definitely yes, good for you." Literally my first thought, nodding like yes. "Good, they sound terrible." "Girl, you did what you had to do, and I would 100% do the exact same thing. Your father, on the other hand, needs to grow some spine. It seems like she's got him wrapped around her fingers. I doubt it was even his idea to get married without inviting you. If he ends up choosing them, just cut them out, though no contact. You don't need that kind of toxicity in your life. Also, make sure he can't contest your inheritance regarding the house, just so they can stay there. You know, people these days. I hope it turns out in your favor. Don't put the secret wedding on the wife. Daddy Dearest dated for 2 years, hiding it so hard that OP had no clue whatsoever. Even if this was her idea, Daddy Dearest was totally in support of it. The amount of entitlement your father's wife and stepdaughters have is absurd. I am so glad you kicked them out. As far as your dad, his behavior is also pretty terrible. The whole thing of, whoops, I got married, didn't tell you, and oh, by the way, can my new family move in? He is not showing any courtesy, respect, and honesty. I wouldn't be surprised if the wedding was the stepmom's idea, especially not inviting the daughter of the man you're marrying. Like, what is that? Just a quick update. I've read through all your comments, and I want to express my gratitude for your support. It means a lot to me. I realize it might seem like I'm a pushover, and maybe I am. I just prefer avoiding confrontation and arguments. I'm not the type to engage in fights with someone. I've taken your advice and decided to change the locks around the house. Unfortunately, the gate on the property is old and rusted, and it's been open for who knows how long. I can't do much about it at the moment. I've contacted the same lawyer who handled my mom's will to review if there are any loopholes or chances that my dad could contest it. I'll be meeting with her in a couple of hours. About my dad, he's a good man. He's worked hard to provide for me and my needs after my mom died. He's never asked me to tap into my money to help with living expenses, etc. He earns a decent amount as an engineer, around 6 figures. So I don't think he's after my money, but I could be wrong. I think he's just blindsided by the fact that someone still finds him attractive at his age. It didn't help that it was his high school sweetheart. I confronted him about his impromptu wedding and how he kept things from me. He said he didn't know how I would react if I knew he was dating his ex-girlfriend before he met and admired my mom. I was upset, but I eventually got over it since he seemed happy having her around. I don't know the full story between them or if there's any bad blood between her and my mom to make her act out and disrespect her. Steph and her daughters are staying somewhere in town now. Frankly, I don't care to find out where. They have the means to take care of themselves, and if they run out, they can always sell their luxury bags. They seem to have so many that they require a whole closet just to store them. For those wondering about my relatives, my mom was an only child, and my grandparents left everything to her. When my mom passed away, I inherited most of what she had, and she also left some to my dad. My grandparents on my dad's side live about 6 hours away with my uncles and cousins. So it's just me, my dad, and Moxie here. Speaking of Moxie, she's doing well. She seems happier and enjoys the quietness around the house. I'll update again as soon as I can. But once again, thank you all for your support. It sounds like I'm safe, and I appreciate your reassurance that kicking them out was the right thing to do. I've taken your suggestion to heart, and will be sure to keep anything sentimental or valuable to me locked up, just in case she comes back and tries to destroy some of my pictures, etc. This is indeed a great suggestion. In addition to changing the locks, I should document and keep records of everything with monetary and sentimental value. Keeping a video record, photographs, a ledger, or a spreadsheet of my belongings is a wise move to ensure their protection. As for the size of my property, it has indeed been in the family for generations. It's filled with a lot of history and sentimental value, making it all the more important to safeguard. You're right. There's nothing wrong with being kind. But sometimes you do have to toughen up and find your strength, which is precisely what I did. I plan to keep my valuables somewhere safe until I'm absolutely certain they are out of my life. If things turn sour, I may consider renting out rooms, but I'll make sure to have a proper lease agreement in place. You made a good point about evaluating my relationship with my dad. It is perplexing that he didn't tell me about his dating and marriage plans, but had no qualms about moving them into my house. It seems that he cares more about her than me, which is disappointing. I did have a conversation with my dad about his impromptu wedding and why he kept it from me. He claimed he was unsure how I'd react if I knew he was dating his ex-girlfriend before he met and married my mom. However, it does seem like he was more concerned about upsetting me over the dating part rather than moving a secret family into my home. In truth, my dad's actions reflect that he doesn't truly care about how difficult this situation has been for me. It's as if he values his wife and her daughter's feelings more than mine. I appreciate your perspective and insights. Now, here's the second update. I spoke with my mother's previous lawyer, Amy, a fake name, about the issue on Saturday and inquired if there was a way to contest the will. Amy showed me the documents, indicating that my dad and I had both signed an agreement stating that we were in accord with what was left to us and that we wouldn't contest it in the future. She also advised giving them a 30-day notice to find a new place and move out to avoid legal troubles related to the inheritance issue. So, the inheritance matter has been resolved. On Saturday night, I was supposed to have dinner with just my dad, but apparently, a private discussion between a father and daughter became a family affair with Steph and the twins present. To cut short the misery, I informed them that I had consulted Amy regarding the house and other legal matters, and that they had 30 days to find a new place and move out. Steph tried to object, but I shut her down, suggesting that we all go to family therapy and take some time to get to know each other. I rolled my eyes at the mere thought. I firmly stated that it had been months since they moved in, yet they hadn't made any effort to be a family unless they needed something. I had had enough, so I asked my dad if he was going with them or staying, indicating that his decision would determine which items he could take with him. He seemed confused, asking if I was kicking him out. I clarified that I wasn't, but wherever he decided to go, he would have to manage on his own. However, I made it clear that I wouldn't maintain contact if he chose to leave. Steph asked why I was evicting him from his own house, to which I replied that I inherited the house from my mother. There seemed to be a misunderstanding on their part, particularly with Lexi, who argued that it would be difficult to move since they were in the midst of finishing the spring semester and finals were just a few weeks away. I simply smiled and suggested they find a new place swiftly. After that, I left the conversation. On Easter Sunday, I invited my boyfriend, his family, and my two best friends over to celebrate. My dad had been calling me, and my brother had been answering his calls, inviting me to spend the day with them. However, as far as I'm concerned, the only family I recognize now are my two best friends, my boyfriend, and his family. It was a wonderful Sunday, filled with egg hunting, games, and a grand dinner, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Everything felt just right. Currently, I'm in the process of meticulously documenting every item in the house worth over $500. I had some people over to assist with this task. All the locks have been changed, and I've only given a copy to my boyfriend. No need to worry about my dad asking him for a key since my dad doesn't approve of him, given his middle-class background. I've also taken steps to enhance security by hiring professionals to install a security system around the house and property. Additionally, I have a meeting scheduled with someone to discuss the fences and gates. I haven't tapped into the funds my mom left behind, as I've been using them for college tuition, dorm expenses, and other needs. However, given the urgency of the situation, I believe it's time to access those funds. All the family pictures and portraits are currently in storage, and other smaller valuables are stored in a safety deposit box. Important documents are kept in a water and fireproof safe that requires both a key and a pin to open, and it's situated in my room. I'm taking every precaution and advice that you've provided in the comments on my previous post. Thank you for your valuable suggestions. So, for now, that's the update. I'm not entirely sure why my dad is choosing to be with them rather than me, his own flesh and blood. I've come to accept that, for some unknown or unexplainable reason, they are more important to him. It's challenging, as he's the only family I have left here, and I'm not particularly close to his side of the family. However, once they move out, I plan to cut contact with him. He's a grown man and can decide what he wants to do with his life. I appreciate all the support and well wishes. Thank you for your encouragement. You're doing a great job, and it's essential not to let your dad manipulate you or lie to get his way. He made his choice, and you shouldn't allow him to weasel his way back into your life. Don't be surprised if some emergency or crisis comes up in the future, as that's a common tactic some families use to regain access. Stay strong and true to your decisions. I cut ties with them 3 years ago. In the past month alone, there have been relentless attempts to drag me back into their chaos. First, there was the pressure to get tested for some unspecified issue when my grandpa needed blood due to a rare problem. Then my grandma had a minor stroke with no lasting damage, but it was blown out of proportion. My sister wanted a divorce, and my parents were unhelpful, leaving me to handle the emotional fallout alone. Now my mom is bombarding me with frantic voicemails about my sister needing support, all while my grandpa battles pneumonia or congestive heart failure. He's 19, his health is deteriorating, and I feel helpless. They paint me as a heartless monster for not caring, but every manufactured crisis has made me numb. They create emergencies, ensuring things can never get better, providing an excuse to stay in my life. I'm doing my best to document everything. You're absolutely right. These people will invent insane reasons to crawl back into my life. Mom might manipulate Dad's decisions by withholding intimacy, forcing him to choose her over me. It's sad how some people prioritize their desires over their children's well-being. I agree. It's time for me to focus my energy on my boyfriend and his family. My dad's blindness to my feelings before making major decisions is disappointing. While I'm an adult, if he's my only family, one would think he'd make wiser choices. I've seen worse situations on various platforms, like husbands leaving their wives for mistresses, so I should be able to handle this. I just hope my boyfriend isn't taking advantage of me. I should consider a prenuptial agreement to safeguard my interests. It's become apparent that she assumed my dad's house was her own, which is why she asked me to give up my room for her convenience. She underestimated my resolve, but it was a crafty move. Kudos to her. But this situation feels like a twisted version of Cinderella, where everything goes right for her, but not for the wicked stepmother and stepsisters. Boycotting contact after my dad moves his new family out seems necessary. He married her without considering my feelings, and he should have provided them with their own place from the start. Perhaps that could have salvaged our relationship. If he genuinely wanted to be a father to me, he should have stood up for me and his late wife against his new family's disrespectful behavior. Instead, he's shifting the burden onto me, and that's not how a parent should act. I'm a 31-year-old man who has been married to my wife, a 27-year-old woman, for nearly 3 years. We've been living together even before tying the knot, and our marriage has generally been a happy one. I've never questioned her loyalty because I've never had a reason to. We've had our fair share of disagreements, but nothing extreme. I was confident that if my wife were ever unhappy, she would communicate it to me. So it hit me like a ton of bricks when I stumbled upon a series of overly friendly messages on her phone one day. Her phone was on the dining table, and I had picked it up to bring it to her bedroom as she had requested. A notification lit up the screen, and I couldn't help but glance at it. There were messages from someone named Kara, and they were of a highly personal nature. I didn't know anyone named Kara, and the nature of those texts immediately raised my suspicions. I brought her the phone in the bedroom, and when she opened it, she asked if I had seen her notifications. I lied and said no, but she mentioned that it was just a notification for a kid's game, and that she felt embarrassed I had seen it. I assured her that I hadn't seen anything and left her to her phone. However, I couldn't help but study her expressions because my doubts were now eating at me. She continued to text Kara with a smile on her face, which only fueled my unease. Unable to shake off my suspicions, I eventually left the room and told her I'd be sleeping in the living room, citing some work I needed to finish. She didn't even look up from her phone when I grabbed a pillow and headed to the couch. Restlessness consumed me as I couldn't stop thinking about those messages and the worst-case scenarios that were playing out in my mind. I had never considered the possibility that she would cheat on me, but now I had my doubts. I let it go that night, but the nagging feeling persisted. I began checking her phone whenever the opportunity arose. I needed to put my mind at ease to know the truth. I wanted desperately for it to be untrue. But then, one day, I saw another text from Kara. It contained a time and place, along with nicknames and emojis that resembled a date plan. I knew I should have confronted her, but I was so furious about her potentially ruining our seemingly perfect marriage that a simple confrontation didn't feel like enough. Instead, I decided to go to the specified place at the designated time. She arrived a bit late, and right in front of the cafe, she kissed the guy. A hello kiss, but a kiss nonetheless. It was the kind of kiss you give your husband when you return from work. I recognized the guy. He was her colleague. I had met him a couple of times when picking my wife up from her office. I knew his name, and I knew for a fact that he was married. I was torn between wanting to storm over and confront them both, to cry my heart out, and maintaining my composure. I chose the latter, hoping to give her a taste of her own medicine. I bided my time, and it was excruciating to be in the same house as her, eating dinner together, sharing a bed, and engaging in conversations about anything while I knew she was betraying me. But I remained patient, determined not to let her get away with it so easily. Our tradition of hosting game nights with friends every other month was the perfect opportunity to carry out my plan, and I organized everything just as we always did. She was always competitive at games, so our game nights were something she looked forward to eagerly. When everyone arrived, we started playing Pictionary. In the midst of the game, just before it was her turn, I slipped a note into the jar. As she picked it up, her expression shifted from joy to confusion, and then embarrassment within seconds. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, and in that moment, I decided to reveal everything I knew right there in front of our friends. Everyone was taken aback because, like me, they hadn't anticipated such a revelation from my wife. She pleaded with me to let her explain, and reluctantly, I agreed, curious about what excuse she would conjure. Through tears, she claimed I was jumping to conclusions, asserting that she was merely friends with her colleague. I remained calm, insisting she pack her bags and leave. Her demeanor changed swiftly. She admitted her mistake, but insisted it was unintentional. I couldn't fathom how infidelity could just happen without neglecting your spouse, but at least she acknowledged it. I calmly told her to leave, unable to bear her presence in my home any longer. I'd also informed her that I intended to speak to her colleague's wife, because he couldn't escape consequences either. Our friends, sympathetic to my situation, tried to console her. Despite my anger, I didn't want her to face this alone. Some friends offered her their guest rooms for the night, but she opted for a hotel. She accused me of humiliating her in front of everyone, insisting we talk when we were both calmer. Reluctantly, I agreed, even though I had little patience for her lies and fabrications at that moment. After she left, she persistently tried to contact me, but I ignored most of her calls and messages. I needed time to gather my thoughts. My wife had unraveled into a mess within a month. I did talk to her colleague's wife, who, too, had suspected her husband's infidelity. She revealed her plans to divorce him and suggested I do the same. I agreed, but it was far from easy. I had loved my wife for a long time, and we had been happy. We didn't have significant issues in our marriage, and yet she had chosen to betray us. About 2 weeks later, my wife, now living in a hotel, begged me to let her in and hear her out. I reluctantly allowed her inside, and she immediately burst into tears. She professed her love for me and admitted her mistake. When I asked how long the affair had been going on, she confessed it had lasted a year. My heart shattered, but my sorrow quickly turned to rage. I couldn't fathom why she had destroyed our otherwise happy marriage. She couldn't provide a single reason for her actions. She insisted on giving our marriage a second chance, but I was done. I told her to leave and not to contact me for a while. I needed time to think, to sort through the chaos she had caused. It's been 6 months since I asked my wife to leave. We've met a couple of times since, during which she apologized profusely, begging me not to divorce her. I was torn because I still loved her deeply. Ending our marriage was the right thing to do after her betrayal, but I couldn't find it in myself to move forward. Our marriage was in limbo. We lived separately, hardly speaking. I knew I had to end it officially because I couldn't trust her anymore. The trust I had once placed in her was irreparably shattered. She kept assuring me she wouldn't repeat her mistake, urging me to trust her again. I was considering giving her another chance when I received an email from her colleague's now ex-wife. She claimed my wife and her ex-husband were still in contact. I desperately hoped she was wrong, hoping my wife couldn't be that cruel. I asked my wife to meet, and, as usual, she began with apologies. I confronted her about her ongoing communication with the man she had the affair with. She hesitated, and in that moment I knew the truth. I urged her to be honest, and she confessed they had spoken when he was going through his divorce. She insisted they were just friends, but the little trust I had left vanished. With that admission, I realized I could never trust her again. There was no point in staying in a marriage where trust and unconditional love were lost. I informed her to expect divorce papers soon. She could take anything she still had in the house. Despite her tears and pleas, there was no other option. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, relieved to finally end the turmoil, but saddened by the loss of what was once a loving relationship. Thankfully, we didn't have children. It made the process a little less painful. She left quietly, and although I didn't care if she went back to that man, I needed to let her go to move on with my life. I should be informed beforehand and not find out when I walk through the door. I expressed my concerns, feeling unsettled about the situation. My wife seemed dismissive, telling me I was overreacting and that my brother needed a place to stay temporarily. The next day, I decided to have a conversation with my wife about boundaries. I explained that while I understood she wanted to help my brother, I needed to be part of the decision-making process, especially when it involved our home. She countered, saying that it was just a temporary situation and I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. I insisted that communication and mutual respect were essential in our relationship and that decisions like these should be made together. As the discussion continued, my wife became defensive, insisting that she was just being supportive and didn't see the need for my involvement. I emphasized the importance of boundaries in maintaining a healthy marriage and family dynamic. We talked through our concerns, trying to find a compromise that respected both our relationship and my brother's situation. In the end, we agreed that in the future, we would discuss such matters before making decisions that affected our home life. While my initial reaction might have been perceived as an overreaction, the conversation allowed us to establish clearer boundaries and strengthen our communication as a couple. I firmly believed that I should have been the one to decide whether my brother stayed over. He had no right to call my wife and intrude without my consent. I insisted that he should have waited for my call, and I planned to talk to him about it in the morning. However, my wife brushed off my concerns, telling me to grow up and accept that he was always welcome in our home. Now my wife is furious with me, and I find myself stuck with my brother in the house, unsure of how long he'll be staying until he figures out his life. Already having 2 teenagers, I felt overwhelmed having another person, especially my adult brother, residing with us. I stood my ground, believing that he shouldn't be here, but my wife remained upset with me. Am I the jerk for asserting that she shouldn't have picked up my brother and allowed him to stay at our house? Update. I don't believe it makes me a bad person to think that an 18-year-old should be independent and not rely on family support. I expect the same for my children. They are supposed to have a job and save money to move out after graduating from high school. If they go to college, they can stay, but they are expected to pay for it themselves and contribute a small amount in rent. My wife doesn't agree with this and believes our children can stay as long as they need. I'm trying to help her see reason. As a child, I was never taken to zoos, museums, or out to eat. I went to a public school and wasn't allowed to participate in sports or activities due to financial constraints. I had to get a job as soon as I could. My parents were 16 when they had me, and even when they got older and had more money, I still didn't receive the opportunities my brother had. My brother received the best, while I got nothing. It's time for him to stand on his own. Yes, my children enjoyed activities like going to the zoo, parks, and museums as well as participating in sports. However, those privileges were for my kids, not my brother. I couldn't understand why my wife would include him in these experiences. My brother has always regarded her as another mother, so I had to share her with him. Last night, when I got home from work, everyone was preparing for dinner. After the meal, I asked my kids to go to their rooms so I could talk to my brother and wife. I questioned my brother about his presence and why he felt the need to involve us instead of dealing with his issues independently. He explained that he needed to escape his home environment. He had just discovered that his girlfriend had cheated on him and was planning to leave. She blamed him for not marrying her or having a baby, which she desired deeply. I told my wife that what she wanted wasn't unreasonable and that my brother was being immature. I argued that if he could live with his girlfriend, he could marry her. My wife countered, saying that not everyone wants to be married and have children at such a young age, reminding me that he was an adult who needed to grow up. I expressed my displeasure with them making decisions without me and explained that this situation could have been resolved the next morning. There was no need for anyone to drive 2 hours or run away from home. I inquired when my brother planned on leaving, and he informed me that his girlfriend was moving out by Sunday, after which he would go back home. He still had 2 months left on the lease, so he intended to look for a smaller place to move into. I shared my reservations about him staying for that extended period, but my wife defended him, insisting he was my brother and a few days wouldn't hurt anyone. Reluctantly, I agreed, although I made it clear that I didn't like it. I felt cornered and uncomfortable with the situation, but I didn't want to make a bigger issue out of it. I still believed he needed to go home and deal with his problems independently. My brother thanked me, and we parted ways. My wife and I continued to discuss the matter, both feeling discontented with one another. "You're the jerk," she said. "He's an adult." Then another person chimed in, "Or are you leaving out a ton of info? You have some minor points. I don't like people staying at my house either, but it isn't just your house, and it's family. You didn't specify that there was a horrible drama or anything. Your post comes off as controlling and unpleasant." The discussion continued with varying opinions. Some believed I was in the wrong, while others saw my point of view. It was clear that this situation had caused tension between my wife and me. The situation turned grim in 2020 when I lost my job due to having to homeschool our kids. We couldn't afford the rent, and 6 months later, we were evicted. My mother-in-law, who initially offered us 2 bedrooms, withdrew her support as soon as we became homeless. For 4 months, we lived out of our van with our kids until a homeless shelter opened up. During this time, both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law distanced themselves from us, showing little compassion. Despite our efforts to reach out, we were met with judgment from sister-in-law, who received her house after her father's passing and hadn't paid taxes in years. We were criticized for our life choices and were made to feel like failures because we were over 30, had 3 kids, and were struggling. Fast forward, we managed to turn things around drastically. We built a house from scratch, involving our kids, and gained invaluable experience. The outcome was perfect. Our kids were overjoyed to have participated in building their own home. We also started our own business, achieving this success without any help from my husband's family, despite their broken promises. Throughout this journey, I couldn't help but develop a bitter resentment toward them due to their lack of support. Recently, my mother-in-law, who is facing eviction herself after losing her retirement benefits, approached us asking to stay in our home if she became homeless. My initial reaction was to laugh at her audacity. My husband stood by my side, showing his resentment toward her for abandoning us in our time of need. She left offended, and later, sister-in-law criticized us, labeling us as trash for not allowing her soon-to-be evicted elderly mother to move in. I suggested a nearby nursing home for her instead. While some friends said my response was harsh, considering the way they treated us, I don't believe I am the jerk in this situation. Their lack of support when we needed it has created a chasm, and I find it hard to extend a helping hand now.
Hello, are you Yumi's mother? I'm calling from the nursery school. Ha! What is it? I was puzzled by the sudden call from the nursery school. At first, I thought it might be some kind of prank, but then the teacher on the other end of the line spoke in a somewhat stern tone. Could you please come to pick up Yumi? The time we can keep her has already passed. I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. I am sorry, but my daughter passed away a month ago. My name is Hazel. I'm 28 years old and I work as a company employee. Currently, I'm dating a man named Nathan. We met at a mixer, and since we were the same age and had similar interests, we hit it off. He seemed like a typical company employee, stable, calm, and sensible. These qualities are important to me, especially since we're at an age where marriage is on the horizon. It's no longer just about appearances. Nathan is a kind person who exceeds my expectations and makes me feel at ease. On our dates, he always comes up with creative ideas, and when we spend time at his place, he prepares delicious meals with impressive skill. This eggplant dish is really good, isn't it? He said one evening, serving up a meal. It's surprisingly easy. I just make it quickly in the microwave. That's amazing. You're really good at Japanese cuisine, I replied, impressed. Yeah, actually my family runs a small restaurant. Really? This was something I learned when we first started dating. Nathan's family lives in the countryside and operates a small restaurant. He learned to cook from his father, who is a chef, and as a result, he's very skilled in the kitchen, capable of making a variety of dishes. Do you have any siblings? I asked. Yeah, I have a younger sister, he answered. Knowing that he had a sister meant he was the eldest son, which made me wonder if he might take over the family business someday. What are you thinking about doing in the future? You know, with your job, I inquired. After a pause, he replied, after working at the company for a bit longer, I plan to return to my hometown and take over the family's small restaurant. I think I'll start with a training period. Oh, is that so? I was a bit taken aback by his plans. If we were to get married, I'd have to leave my current job and move with him. I work as a web designer, and I really enjoy my job. I hadn't considered quitting anytime soon, but at the same time, I wanted to be with Nathan. Before I knew it, I found myself discussing this dilemma with a senior colleague at work. Then why don't you try applying for remote work? She suggested. Really? The advantage of our job is that we can do it anywhere as long as we have a computer. If you manage your work properly, some companies will allow you to work from home. I'm sure your company can accommodate that too. Is that so? Hearing her words filled me with hope. This meant I could continue my current job even if I moved with Nathan. In fact, after I talked to Nathan about the future, he admitted that he had been thinking he would have to make me quit my job and take me with him if we got married, which had made things feel a bit awkward between us. I immediately asked my boss if it was possible to switch to remote work. If you meet the criteria set by the company, there should be no problem, was the response. As for the internet connection and computer, everything was falling into place. This meant that if I wanted to, I could move to Nathan's hometown right away. After confirming with my boss, I shared the news with Nathan on our next date. Really? So you mean you can continue your current job while living in my hometown? He asked, a mixture of surprise and relief on his face. Yes, that's possible, I replied with a smile. That's great. He looked genuinely relieved, and seeing his expression made me feel the same way. It didn't take long after that for us to decide to get married. Hazel, if you don't mind, would you marry me and move to my hometown? Nathan asked one evening, his voice filled with sincerity. Yes, I'd love to, I said without hesitation. And so, we decided to tie the knot. When I told my parents about the move, they seemed a bit sad but ultimately supported me, sending me off with the words, "Be happy." Nathan and I got married and started our life together. He began working at his family's small restaurant under his father's guidance. Since the restaurant was next to his parents' house, we initially lived with them. At the suggestion of my in-laws, who wanted Nathan to focus on learning the business without worrying about household chores, they proposed that we stay with them to lighten our load. However, I would later realize that this decision was a mistake. Living with my in-laws turned out to be more challenging than I had anticipated. Hazel, how long do you intend to stay holed up in your room? My mother-in-law, Susan, said one day, knocking on the door forcefully. I'm working, Susan. I'm actually working right now, I explained. Working? You're always in your room. What kind of work are you doing? Are you trying to deceive me with that excuse? she retorted, her tone filled with suspicion. I'll never accept it, my mother-in-law declared. But I really am working, I insisted. Don't lie. You're just playing around, drawing pictures on that computer, aren't you? She snapped, glancing at my screen. This is called web design. It's my job, I explained, trying to remain patient. I won't be fooled. It's shameful for an adult to be wasting time drawing pictures, she retorted. My mother-in-law likely held old-fashioned views and didn't seem to grasp the concept of working from home. To her, I wasn't really working. I was just cooped up at home, neglecting household chores. I never thought I'd have such a lazy daughter-in-law. Nathan is working hard to become first class, and here you are, playing around like a parasite. Try to be more useful, she criticized almost daily, making it increasingly difficult for me to concentrate on my work. Desperate to change the situation, I decided to talk to my husband about it. Oh, my mom's getting in the way of your work? Nathan asked when I brought it up. Yes, it's like she doesn't understand I'm working from home. She thinks I'm just goofing off, I explained. I see. My mom has old-fashioned ideas, so it might be inevitable. I'll talk to her, he assured me. Nathan's support gave me some relief, but my mother-in-law was more stubborn than I had anticipated. How did you convince Nathan? Why do I have to be scolded? She fumed. It's clear you're just playing around. That's not it. I've been trying to explain. I protested, but our clashes only grew more frequent. Each time she made unreasonable remarks, I turned to Nathan for help. But over time, he seemed less willing to mediate. This is a problem between the two of you. Solve it yourselves, he said one day. Just as I was beginning to feel I couldn't take it anymore, something unexpected happened. Feeling unwell, I went to the hospital, only to be shocked by the news. I was pregnant. My mother-in-law had often pressured me to provide a successor, but I never imagined getting pregnant at such a tumultuous time. I immediately informed my husband and in-laws about the pregnancy. The news took everyone by surprise, but my mother-in-law was especially stunned. Well done, she said, clearly delighted. Both my husband and father-in-law were happy too, but my mother-in-law's joy was the most apparent. Since then, she had become much kinder to me. Hazel, how are you feeling? I'll handle the household chores so you don't overdo it, she offered. Her sudden change in attitude was a relief. The scolding and bullying that had once been a daily occurrence stopped, and instead, she became supportive and caring about my health. It was comforting to have the previously confrontational mother-in-law offer me support during this challenging time. Despite the initial strain on my relationship with my husband, things began to improve, and our bond grew stronger. I settled into a stable condition as I prepared for childbirth. However, a new issue emerged during this time. Sometime after the news of my pregnancy, my mother-in-law asked, "By the way, can you tell the baby's gender yet?" "Yes, it's a girl," I replied honestly. Her face fell with disappointment. "A girl? It should have been a boy. Our restaurant has always been passed down to males. Women inheriting such businesses is unheard of." I tried to reason with her. That's unacceptable. Nowadays, women can inherit businesses too. Her response was harsh. Don't try to justify yourself with your strange values. You're clearly not suited for this. Although my father-in-law and husband were slightly disappointed that the baby wasn't a boy, they weren't as upset as my mother-in-law. However, her disapproval quickly turned into hostility. Having no heir means you're worthless. How long are you going to stay in bed? Get up and do some housework, she demanded. I'm sorry, but I've been really sick with morning sickness, I explained. Don't be so spoiled. Pregnancy is not an illness. Get moving, she shouted as she came to wake me. Facing both poor health and harsh treatment, I decided to go against my in-laws' wishes and return to my parents' house for the birth. Spending time at my parents' home felt like a long-awaited relief. While I found great relief both mentally and physically during my time at my parents' home, it was clear that my stay with my in-laws had been a significant source of stress. After some time at my parents' place, my daughter was finally born. My husband and I had chosen the name Yi for her, and she was absolutely adorable. I made a firm promise to protect her with all my heart. Perhaps because the hospital where I gave birth was in my hometown, none of my in-laws visited. Not even once. I had hoped my husband would come, but he couldn't make it due to the restaurant's demands. After resting and regaining my health, I decided to return to my in-laws' home, but I quickly regretted it. My mother-in-law greeted me with an angry expression. You've taken your sweet time bringing back my grandchild. Why the delay? I'm sorry, I needed some rest, I explained. Rest? We've been incredibly busy. What do you mean by busy? She retorted. The restaurant was featured in magazines and on TV, and we've been fully booked every day. I even had to help out there, I said. I see, that's why I need you to come to the restaurant immediately, my mother-in-law demanded. Feeling overwhelmed, I saw no other option. My husband also urged me to help, explaining that the restaurant was in trouble. Reluctantly, I put my daughter in daycare and began assisting at my in-laws' restaurant. The real challenge started then. I had to work at the restaurant every day, manage all the household chores, and care for my child. My health was deteriorating, and on top of that, I was subjected to constant verbal abuse from my mother-in-law, which pushed me to my mental limits. Amidst all this, one day, I suddenly collapsed and was diagnosed with a stress-induced gastric ulcer. After regaining consciousness, I explained my situation to the doctor, who advised that I would need a longer hospital stay than usual. When I informed my mother-in-law, her response was devoid of concern. What a troubled woman, she said dismissively over the phone. Meanwhile, my husband apologized, saying, I'm sorry for pushing you too hard. But it felt too little too late. I couldn't shake the feeling that he too was responsible for letting things spiral so badly. During my hospital stay, Rose, who worked at a small restaurant, came to my aid. I'll take care of you, she said. I'll handle the drop-offs and pickups for your daughter. Thank you so much, I said, deeply relieved. Rose's help with daycare was a lifeline, allowing me to focus on my recovery with some peace of mind. However, a few weeks into my hospitalization, I received a frantic call from my husband. Hazel, please calm down and listen. Yumi, she's died. She was caught in a big fire and her body couldn't be saved. The words struck me like a blow and I could barely process the news. I'm sorry, but I'm also suffering, he said. The shocking news left me deeply unsettled. When I returned to my in-laws' home after being discharged, I was met with the grim sight of an urn containing my daughter's ashes. Overwhelmed with grief, I was further stunned by my husband's next statement. I'm giving you this urn and asking for a divorce. I can't continue our marriage with the loss of our daughter and the ongoing issues with my mother. I understand if you're fed up with the situation. I am, I said. I'm done with your mother's bullying and your inability to protect me. I'll leave. Determined to move on, I decided to leave my in-laws' home and pursue a divorce. When I returned to my parents' house, their warm welcome provided a much-needed source of comfort in the depths of my sorrow. When I explained my situation to my company where I had been taking time off, they were understanding and allowed me to extend my leave. After a month of rest, I received an unexpected phone call. Hello, is this Yumi's mother? This is a staff member from the nursery. Why are you calling? I was initially puzzled and thought it might be a joke. But the voice on the other end was stern. Could you please come and pick up Yumi? It's past the time we can keep her. Confused, I replied, I'm sorry, but my daughter passed away a month ago. The teacher's tone shifted to anger. Why would you say such a thing? It's unthinkable to neglect your own child. Please come quickly. Overwhelmed by their reaction, I rushed to the nursery. To my shock, I found Yumi there, alive and laughing joyously. The relief of seeing her safe was immense. A teacher approached me, clearly having realized the misunderstanding. We were told by your mother-in-law that you were too busy to pick up Yumi, so she's been bringing her here daily. Hearing that my mother-in-law had falsely claimed Yumi was in my care while she was actually alive at the nursery filled me with rage. My contact information was listed as the emergency contact, which is why the nursery had called me. My husband and father-in-law had deceived me, and I was furious. Taking Yumi, I returned to my parents' home. As I settled in, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my mother-in-law. Why did you take Yumi back without permission? She yelled. I retorted, why did you lie about Yumi's death? I found out she was alive and left at the nursery. If you all want to lie to make things easier for yourselves, that ends now. I will raise my daughter myself. Do as you like, but don't contact me again. My mother-in-law was silent and then hung up. Fueled by anger, I resolved to uncover the full truth about the situation. I went to my in-laws' house armed with important documents. What are you doing here? My mother-in-law asked, visibly surprised. That day, the restaurant was closed and the whole family was at home, including another key person. I've come to discuss the affair between Nathan and Rose, I said. The mention of the affair visibly shook my in-laws. Affair? What are you talking about? My ex-husband asked, his face paling. I presented documents proving that Rose was pregnant and that Nathan was the father. According to these, Rose was pregnant around the time I gave birth. While I was in the dark, you two were involved in an affair that led to this pregnancy. To cover it up, you lied to me about Yumi's death. Their faces turned even whiter as they absorbed my words. I'm relieved that Yumi is safe, but I will be demanding compensation for my mental distress and child support, I declared. My ex-husband began to apologize profusely. I'm truly sorry. It was wrong. This was all my mother's idea, and I was against it. We intended to put Yumi in a child welfare institution. Child welfare institution? What are you talking about? I demanded. He revealed the shocking truth. The plan had been to fake Yumi's death and place her in a child welfare institution to avoid paying compensation and child support. My anger reached its peak. I'm truly sorry. Please, I beg you to overlook the compensation and child support, he pleaded. There's no way I can forgive that. I'm going to sue you. Be prepared, I replied, and left the house. Following these events, I demanded compensation from Nathan and Rose and sought child support from my ex-husband. I also detailed the situation to neighbors, regular customers of the restaurant, and mothers from the nursery school. The scandal spread quickly, tarnishing my in-laws' reputation. As word spread on social media and even new customers who had heard about the restaurant through magazines stopped coming, the family's small restaurant was forced to close within a year. It felt like just deserts for their despicable actions. Meanwhile, I continued working from home at my parents' house, focusing on raising my daughter. She's growing up well, and both my parents and I are delighted to see her thrive. I plan to keep working hard for her future. Hello, are you Yumi's mother? I'm calling from the nursery school. Ha! What is it? I was puzzled by the sudden call from the nursery school. At first, I thought it might be some kind of prank, but then the teacher on the other end of the line spoke in a somewhat stern tone. Could you please come to pick up Yumi? The time we can keep her has already passed. I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. I am sorry, but my daughter passed away a month ago. My name is Hazel. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a company employee. Currently, I'm dating a man named Nathan. We met at a mixer, and since we were the same age and had similar interests, we hit it off. He seemed like a typical company employee, stable, calm, and sensible. These qualities are important to me, especially since we're at an age where marriage is on the horizon. It's no longer just about appearances. Nathan is a kind person who exceeds my expectations and makes me feel at ease. On our dates, he always comes up with creative ideas, and when we spend time at his place, he prepares delicious meals with impressive skill. This eggplant dish is really good, isn't it? He said one evening, serving up a meal. It's surprisingly easy. I just make it quickly in the microwave. That's amazing. You're really good at Japanese cuisine, I replied, impressed. Yeah, actually my family runs a small restaurant. Really? This was something I learned when we first started dating. Nathan's family lives in the countryside and operates a small restaurant. He learned to cook from his father, who is a chef, and as a result, he's very skilled in the kitchen, capable of making a variety of dishes. Do you have any siblings? I asked. Yeah, I have a younger sister, he answered. Knowing that he had a sister meant he was the eldest son, which made me wonder if he might take over the family business someday. What are you thinking about doing in the future? You know, with your job, I inquired. After a pause, he replied, after working at the company for a bit longer, I plan to return to my hometown and take over the family's small restaurant. I think I'll start with a training period. Oh, is that so? I was a bit taken aback by his plans. If we were to get married, I'd have to leave my current job and move with him. I work as a web designer, and I really enjoy my job. I hadn't considered quitting anytime soon, but at the same time, I wanted to be with Nathan. Before I knew it, I found myself discussing this dilemma with a senior colleague at work. Then why don't you try applying for remote work? She suggested. Really? The advantage of our job is that we can do it anywhere as long as we have a computer. If you manage your work properly, some companies will allow you to work from home. I'm sure your company can accommodate that too. Is that so? Hearing her words filled me with hope. This meant I could continue my current job even if I moved with Nathan. In fact, after I talked to Nathan about the future, he admitted that he had been thinking he would have to make me quit my job and take me with him if we got married, which had made things feel a bit awkward between us. I immediately asked my boss if it was possible to switch to remote work. If you meet the criteria set by the company, there should be no problem, was the response. As for the internet connection and computer, everything was falling into place. This meant that if I wanted to, I could move to Nathan's hometown right away. After confirming with my boss, I shared the news with Nathan on our next date. Really? So you mean you can continue your current job while living in my hometown? He asked, a mixture of surprise and relief on his face. Yes, that's possible, I replied with a smile. That's great. He looked genuinely relieved, and seeing his expression made me feel the same way. It didn't take long after that for us to decide to get married. Hazel, if you don't mind, would you marry me and move to my hometown? Nathan asked one evening, his voice filled with sincerity. Yes, I'd love to, I said without hesitation. And so, we decided to tie the knot. When I told my parents about the move, they seemed a bit sad but ultimately supported me, sending me off with the words, "Be happy." Nathan and I got married and started our life together. He began working at his family's small restaurant under his father's guidance. Since the restaurant was next to his parents' house, we initially lived with them. At the suggestion of my in-laws, who wanted Nathan to focus on learning the business without worrying about household chores, they proposed that we stay with them to lighten our load. However, I would later realize that this decision was a mistake. Living with my in-laws turned out to be more challenging than I had anticipated. Hazel, how long do you intend to stay holed up in your room? My mother-in-law, Susan, said one day, knocking on the door forcefully. I'm working, Susan. I'm actually working right now, I explained. Working? You're always in your room. What kind of work are you doing? Are you trying to deceive me with that excuse? She retorted, her tone filled with suspicion. I'll never accept it, my mother-in-law declared. But I really am working, I insisted. Don't lie. You're just playing around, drawing pictures on that computer, aren't you? She snapped, glancing at my screen. This is called web design. It's my job, I explained, trying to remain patient. I won't be fooled. It's shameful for an adult to be wasting time drawing pictures, she retorted. My mother-in-law likely held old-fashioned views and didn't seem to grasp the concept of working from home. To her, I wasn't really working. I was just cooped up at home, neglecting household chores. I never thought I'd have such a lazy daughter-in-law. Nathan is working hard to become first class, and here you are, playing around like a parasite. Try to be more useful, she criticized almost daily, making it increasingly difficult for me to concentrate on my work. Desperate to change the situation, I decided to talk to my husband about it. Oh, my mom's getting in the way of your work? Nathan asked when I brought it up. Yes, it's like she doesn't understand I'm working from home. She thinks I'm just goofing off, I explained. I see. My mom has old-fashioned ideas, so it might be inevitable. I'll talk to her, he assured me. Nathan's support gave me some relief, but my mother-in-law was more stubborn than I had anticipated. How did you convince Nathan? Why do I have to be scolded? She fumed. It's clear you're just playing around. That's not it. I've been trying to explain. I protested, but our clashes only grew more frequent. Each time she made unreasonable remarks, I turned to Nathan for help. But over time, he seemed less willing to mediate. This is a problem between the two of you. Solve it yourselves, he said one day. Just as I was beginning to feel I couldn't take it anymore, something unexpected happened. Feeling unwell, I went to the hospital, only to be shocked by the news. I was pregnant. My mother-in-law had often pressured me to provide a successor, but I never imagined getting pregnant at such a tumultuous time. I immediately informed my husband and in-laws about the pregnancy. The news took everyone by surprise, but my mother-in-law was especially stunned. Well done, she said, clearly delighted. Both my husband and father-in-law were happy too, but my mother-in-law's joy was the most apparent. Since then, she had become much kinder to me. Hazel, how are you feeling? I'll handle the household chores so you don't overdo it, she offered. Her sudden change in attitude was a relief. The scolding and bullying that had once been a daily occurrence stopped, and instead, she became supportive and caring about my health. It was comforting to have the previously confrontational mother-in-law offer me support during this challenging time. Despite the initial strain on my relationship with my husband, things began to improve, and our bond grew stronger. I settled into a stable condition as I prepared for childbirth. However, a new issue emerged during this time. Sometime after the news of my pregnancy, my mother-in-law asked, "By the way, can you tell the baby's gender yet?" "Yes, it's a girl," I replied honestly. Her face fell with disappointment. "A girl? It should have been a boy. Our restaurant has always been passed down to males. Women inheriting such businesses is unheard of." I tried to reason with her. That's unacceptable. Nowadays, women can inherit businesses too. Her response was harsh. "Don't try to justify yourself with your strange values. You're clearly not suited for this." Although my father-in-law and husband were slightly disappointed that the baby wasn't a boy, they weren't as upset as my mother-in-law. However, her disapproval quickly turned into hostility. "Having no heir means you're worthless. How long are you going to stay in bed? Get up and do some housework," she demanded. "I'm sorry, but I've been really sick with morning sickness," I explained. "Don't be so spoiled. Pregnancy is not an illness. Get moving," she shouted as she came to wake me. Facing both poor health and harsh treatment, I decided to go against my in-laws' wishes and return to my parents' house for the birth. Spending time at my parents' home felt like a long-awaited relief. While I found great relief both mentally and physically during my time at my parents' home, it was clear that my stay with my in-laws had been a significant source of stress. After some time at my parents' place, my daughter was finally born. My husband and I had chosen the name Yi for her, and she was absolutely adorable. I made a firm promise to protect her with all my heart. Perhaps because the hospital where I gave birth was in my hometown, none of my in-laws visited. Not even once. I had hoped my husband would come, but he couldn't make it due to the restaurant's demands. After resting and regaining my health, I decided to return to my in-laws' home, but I quickly regretted it. My mother-in-law greeted me with an angry expression. "You've taken your sweet time bringing back my grandchild. Why the delay?" "I'm sorry. I needed some rest," I explained. "Rest? We've been incredibly busy." "What do you mean by busy?" she retorted. "The restaurant was featured in magazines and on TV, and we've been fully booked every day. I even had to help out there," I said. "I see. That's why I need you to come to the restaurant immediately," my mother-in-law demanded. Feeling overwhelmed, I saw no other option. My husband also urged me to help, explaining that the restaurant was in trouble. Reluctantly, I put my daughter in daycare and began assisting at my in-laws' restaurant. The real challenge started then. I had to work at the restaurant every day, manage all the household chores, and care for my child. My health was deteriorating, and on top of that, I was subjected to constant verbal abuse from my mother-in-law, which pushed me to my mental limits. Amidst all this, one day, I suddenly collapsed and was diagnosed with a stress-induced gastric ulcer. After regaining consciousness, I explained my situation to the doctor, who advised that I would need a longer hospital stay than usual. When I informed my mother-in-law, her response was devoid of concern. "What a troubled woman," she said dismissively over the phone. Meanwhile, my husband apologized, saying, "I'm sorry for pushing you too hard." But it felt too little too late. I couldn't shake the feeling that he too was responsible for letting things spiral so badly. During my hospital stay, Rose, who worked at a small restaurant, came to my aid. "I'll take care of you," she said. "I'll handle the drop-offs and pickups for your daughter." "Thank you so much," I said, deeply relieved. Rose's help with daycare was a lifeline, allowing me to focus on my recovery with some peace of mind. However, a few weeks into my hospitalization, I received a frantic call from my husband. "Hazel, please calm down and listen. Yumi, she's died. She was caught in a big fire, and her body couldn't be saved." The words struck me like a blow, and I could barely process the news. "I'm sorry, but I'm also suffering," he said. The shocking news left me deeply unsettled. When I returned to my in-laws' home after being discharged, I was met with the grim sight of an urn containing my daughter's ashes. Overwhelmed with grief, I was further stunned by my husband's next statement. "I'm giving you this urn and asking for a divorce. I can't continue our marriage with the loss of our daughter and the ongoing issues with my mother. I understand if you're fed up with the situation." "I am," I said. "I'm done with your mother's bullying and your inability to protect me. I'll leave." Determined to move on, I decided to leave my in-laws' home and pursue a divorce. When I returned to my parents' house, their warm welcome provided a much-needed source of comfort in the depths of my sorrow. When I explained my situation to my company where I had been taking time off, they were understanding and allowed me to extend my leave. After a month of rest, I received an unexpected phone call. "Hello, is this Yumi's mother? This is a staff member from the nursery. Why are you calling?" I was initially puzzled and thought it might be a joke. But the voice on the other end was stern. "Could you please come and pick up Yumi? It's past the time we can keep her." Confused, I replied, "I'm sorry, but my daughter passed away a month ago." The teacher's tone shifted to anger. "Why would you say such a thing? It's unthinkable to neglect your own child. Please come quickly." Overwhelmed by their reaction, I rushed to the nursery. To my shock, I found Yumi there, alive and laughing joyously. The relief of seeing her safe was immense. A teacher approached me, clearly having realized the misunderstanding. "We were told by your mother-in-law that you were too busy to pick up Yumi, so she's been bringing her here daily." Hearing that my mother-in-law had falsely claimed Yumi was in my care while she was actually alive at the nursery filled me with rage. My contact information was listed as the emergency contact, which is why the nursery had called me. My husband and father-in-law had deceived me, and I was furious. Taking Yumi, I returned to my parents' home. As I settled in, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my mother-in-law. "Why did you take Yumi back without permission?" she yelled. I retorted, "Why did you lie about Yumi's death? I found out she was alive and left at the nursery. If you all want to lie to make things easier for yourselves, that ends now. I will raise my daughter myself. Do as you like, but don't contact me again." My mother-in-law was silent and then hung up. Fueled by anger, I resolved to uncover the full truth about the situation. I went to my in-laws' house armed with important documents. "What are you doing here?" my mother-in-law asked, visibly surprised. That day, the restaurant was closed and the whole family was at home, including another key person. "I've come to discuss the affair between Nathan and Rose," I said. The mention of the affair visibly shook my in-laws. "Affair? What are you talking about?" my ex-husband asked, his face paling. I presented documents proving that Rose was pregnant and that Nathan was the father. According to these, Rose was pregnant around the time I gave birth. While I was in the dark, you two were involved in an affair that led to this pregnancy. To cover it up, you lied to me about Yumi's death. Their faces turned even whiter as they absorbed my words. "I'm relieved that Yumi is safe, but I will be demanding compensation for my mental distress and child support," I declared. My ex-husband began to apologize profusely. "I'm truly sorry. It was wrong. This was all my mother's idea, and I was against it. We intended to put Yumi in a child welfare institution." "Child welfare institution? What are you talking about?" I demanded. He revealed a shocking truth. The plan had been to fake Yumi's death and place her in a child welfare institution to avoid paying compensation and child support. My anger reached its peak. "I'm truly sorry. Please, I beg you to overlook the compensation and child support," he pleaded. "There's no way I can forgive that. I'm going to sue you. Be prepared," I replied, and left the house. Following these events, I demanded compensation from Nathan and Rose and sought child support from my ex-husband. I also detailed the situation to neighbors, regular customers of the restaurant, and mothers from the nursery school. The scandal spread quickly, tarnishing my in-laws' reputation. As word spread on social media and even new customers who had heard about the restaurant through magazines stopped coming, the family's small restaurant was forced to close within a year. It felt like just deserts for their despicable actions. Meanwhile, I continued working from home at my parents' house, focusing on raising my daughter. She's growing up well, and both my parents and I are delighted to see her thrive. I plan to keep working hard for her future.
I am a 50-year-old woman who, from a young age, embraced a belief in reciprocity. I trusted that my diligence and kindness would be met with the same from others. This principle guided my relationships, and I firmly believed that treating people with compassion would inspire them to do the same. Even after marriage, I held on to this belief, hoping that my care and thoughtfulness toward my husband would be mirrored by him. Back then, the expectations placed on women were different. We were often expected to make sacrifices, and I accepted these norms wholeheartedly. I devoted myself to my husband and children, confident that these sacrifices would lead to a fulfilling future. Yet, life didn't unfold as I had hoped. Despite tireless efforts and countless early mornings dedicated to my family, my work often went unnoticed, overshadowed by complaints or minor mistakes. I wasn't forced into this lifestyle. I was just an ordinary person who married a coworker 5 years my senior, conforming to the societal norms of the time. After the birth of my daughter, I left my job to become a full-time housewife. I never regretted the decision, seeing it as a natural step for maintaining family harmony. My life wasn't glamorous like the stories in TV dramas, but it was stable and manageable, until my daughter reached 9th grade. That was when tragedy struck. My mother passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Amid my grief, I discovered my husband's affair. While I mourned, he found solace in someone else, growing distant and eventually demanding a divorce. In those days, divorce was heavily stigmatized. Despite his cold and irresponsible behavior, I hesitated to consider separation. Looking back, I realize how naive I was. Yet, with a daughter witnessing our crumbling marriage, I felt trapped. During a particularly heated argument about our impending separation, my father, recently widowed and deeply concerned, came to visit. Witnessing my distress, he encouraged me to leave with my daughter and offered us refuge. His support marked a turning point. With his help, I saw that clinging to a failing marriage was futile. Overwhelmed by his compassion and wisdom, I agreed to the divorce. In the settlement, my husband gave me $6,000 in cash. With my father's backing, I secured a modest 3-bedroom townhouse for my daughter and me. It became a fresh start, but I braced myself for the challenges ahead. As a divorced woman raising a teenager, I anticipated judgment and scrutiny. My daughter, like any adolescent, struggled with the upheaval and often voiced her frustrations. Yet, I knew I couldn't afford to dwell on the past. I had to provide for her, so I threw myself into finding stable work. Being an older, divorced woman with a dependent child posed challenges in the job market. Undeterred, I juggled multiple part-time jobs, worked night shifts, and took on freelance work whenever possible. As time passed, my daughter reached her senior year of high school. Despite our financial struggles, she excelled academically and found ways to thrive. Motivated to secure her future, I took a demanding job at a 24-hour restaurant. Enduring 11-hour shifts, I saved 2/3 of my earnings for her college tuition. Throughout, I faced judgment and gossip, particularly from married men who assumed I was vulnerable, but I persevered for my daughter's sake. The sacrifices were many, but I was determined to give her opportunities one never had. She became my anchor, giving me the strength to endure life's challenges. I clung to the hope that one day, we'd look back on these hardships with pride in our resilience. A year later, my daughter's outstanding academic performance earned her admission to Harvard University. That moment brought immense joy and validation, making all our struggles feel worthwhile. As she embarked on her college journey, I reflected on everything we had endured and felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing we had triumphed together. I felt a profound mix of pride and relief knowing that our shared sacrifices had led to such a promising new chapter in my daughter's life. Although I had managed to provide her with an education and a stable home, the emptiness left by her absence was palpable. We kept in touch regularly through phone calls, and during the initial months of her newfound independence, our relationship deepened. Her continued affection and connection were a comfort to me, and I treasured the growth in our bond despite the challenges we had faced. When my daughter graduated from college without financial burdens, a dream we had tirelessly worked toward, I felt an immense sense of accomplishment. I had hoped we might live together again, but to my surprise, she secured a job at a defense corporation and chose to live independently. To support her decision, I took out a bank loan and helped with the down payment for a condo near her workplace. As I aged and adopted a simpler lifestyle, my daughter blossomed into a stylish and confident career woman. Seeing her thrive brought me immeasurable joy, reinforcing the value of my sacrifices. In her success, I found great satisfaction, feeling the truth in the saying that people often forget their own needs in moments of joy. Despite the financial stability I had provided during her college years, her upcoming wedding presented a new challenge. Some questioned why I continued to struggle financially when my daughter was capable of supporting herself. Yet, I was determined to contribute to her wedding expenses to prevent any potential disdain from her future in-laws. My belief that sacrifices for her happiness would bring joy to us both kept me resilient. As she entered the dating world, I noticed a growing distance between us. Initially, the change hurt, but I came to understand that her adult life and relationships rightfully took precedence. I waited patiently, hoping she would mature and reconnect with me, realizing that priorities naturally shift during this phase of life. On her 28th birthday, however, I experienced a poignant moment. I had looked forward to celebrating together, but she told me she had plans with someone named Scott and reassured me that there was no need for any special preparations. While her intent may have been to ease my burden, her casual dismissal of the day stung. Her birthday, a day so significant to me, seemed to be just another day to her. Determined to see her, even briefly, I took the day off work and made an extra effort with my appearance before heading to her office. But what I encountered there left me reeling. In the lobby, I saw my ex-husband with his new partner, people I had long hoped to avoid. How he knew to be there puzzled me. When I tried to call my daughter, she abruptly hung up, claiming she was in a meeting. Feeling bewildered, I turned around and, to my shock, saw her cheerfully calling out to her father and embracing him warmly. Her boyfriend seemed to know my ex-husband and his wife, which deepened my sense of betrayal. It felt as though everyone had conspired against me. Drained and upset, I quickly left the scene. Reflecting on that day, I wrestled with a desire to confront both my daughter and my ex-husband, but a stronger urge to retreat and protect my heart won out. Despite the turmoil, I resolved to continue loving and supporting my daughter, holding on to the hope that time would bring understanding and healing between us. I found myself unable to reach out to her. Then, unexpectedly, my daughter came to visit, announcing her engagement and handing me a wedding invitation. As I read the invitation, my heart sank. The names printed on it stunned me. Though she was my daughter, I felt an intense urge to send her away. How could she treat me merely as a guest at her wedding? Unable to hold back, I confronted her, expressing my hurt at being marginalized during such a significant event. I'm not just a guest, I told her. I'm your mother. My daughter apologized, her voice hesitant, explaining that she felt trapped by the circumstances. She wanted to marry Scott, but his parents scrutinized every detail about her. Her revelation left me grappling with a mix of emotions, hurt by her actions, but torn by the need to understand her position. During our conversation, she shared her fears. She worried that my status as a divorced single mother and the struggles we endured might negatively impact how Scott's family viewed her. Her confession stung deeply. I couldn't hide my frustration. I reminded her of the sacrifices I had made, the years of working tirelessly in a restaurant to fund her education, the hardships we had faced together. Her actions felt like a betrayal. Yet, despite my pain, I tried to bridge the gap between us, hoping to find common ground as she approached this life-changing decision. But then she said something that shocked me. She brushed aside our shared struggles, focusing instead on her future comfort. She revealed that her father and his new partner, the very woman who had caused the breakdown of our family, had already met her future in-laws. The past doesn't matter, she said coldly, only the present does. Her dismissive attitude hit me like a blow. For the first time, I harshly expressed my disappointment. In response, she retaliated with a bitterness I hadn't expected. If you want to remove me from your life, she said, then reimburse me for the costs of raising me. The exchange escalated quickly, her words cutting deeply. She stormed out of my home, declaring us strangers. Left alone, I stared at the wedding invitation she left behind, noticing that another name, her father's, had taken the place where mine should have been. 2 years later, I received devastating news. My father, who had chosen to live independently to avoid burdening me, had passed away. His death hit me hard, bringing with it a painful realization of my shortcomings as a daughter. A few months after his passing, I inherited the modest condo where he had lived. It became a poignant reminder of the family ties and challenges that had shaped my life. As I stood in that condo, I thought about the money I had saved for my daughter's unused wedding. A bittersweet realization dawned. I had spent so much of my life sacrificing for others, trusting that my devotion would be enough, but perhaps I had neglected myself in the process. It was time to change. I decided to start living for myself, even if it felt late in life. Reflecting on everything I had endured, I resolved to prioritize my own desires and needs before it was too late. Amid these reflections, a close friend, a real estate broker I had worked with during my restaurant years, offered a glimpse of a new path forward. I had spent most of my life sacrificing for others, trying to meet expectations and ensure those I loved were cared for. But one day, a close friend, a real estate broker I knew from my restaurant days, challenged me to consider what I truly wanted. She encouraged me to break free from societal expectations that demand women sacrifice endlessly. Her words sparked something in me, a desire to live for myself. Though I felt pangs of regret for the years lost to sacrifice, a new sense of hope began to grow. Inspired, I decided to take a leap into the real estate business. Using my savings and the proceeds from selling my late father's condo, I studied auction bidding and took a bold step. To my astonishment, I became the owner of a building in a prime location almost overnight. 8 months later, after returning from a mountain climbing adventure, I moved into the top floor of my building, transforming it into a cozy home. I felt a sense of liberation, a fresh start to a life where my happiness took center stage. One evening, as I rested from my adventures, a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Exhausted but curious, I opened it to find my daughter standing there. She was visibly pregnant, holding a chubby-cheeked toddler, with tears streaming down her face. Her life, she confessed, was in turmoil. Her husband had become violent and unfaithful. Now, on the verge of giving birth and needing to care for her young daughter, she sought refuge with me. Her arrival stirred a tempest of emotions. The wounds from our past, her disregard for my sacrifices, and our bitter parting, were still fresh. She admitted that beyond seeking shelter, she needed financial help. She even hinted at a claim to the money I had once set aside for her wedding and my inheritance. Caught between compassion and anger, I confronted her. I saved for your education and your wedding. I sacrificed everything for you. You once told me to stay out of your life. Now, after all that, you come back and ask for money? The bond between a parent and child isn't something to be exploited whenever it's convenient. Her response cut deep. I am still your daughter. You raised me to be strong. But maybe you were too busy working to teach me how to be a better person. I'd become selfish. But now, I have no one else. My father's new wife ran off with all his money, and he's disappeared trying to find her. If you abandon me, I'll be like an orphan, with no one to turn to. How could you turn your back on me and your grandchildren? Her words overwhelmed me. In the heat of the moment, I pulled out all the cash I had and threw it at her. Take this money, I said coldly, but after this, don't come back. I won't let you walk in and out of my life as you please. Your life is important, but so is mine. I watched as she left, carrying her child and her unborn burden. The pain of asking my daughter to leave was almost unbearable, but her selfishness, and the echoes of past grievances, had become too much to endure. After that, my daughter never returned. Too proud to admit her mistakes, she cut ties entirely. I often wondered if things could have been different, if she had come back genuinely repentant, seeking forgiveness and understanding. Perhaps I would have found it in my heart to help her, to confront the mess her husband had made of their lives, but that moment never came. Instead, I was left to reflect on the complexities of our relationship, the pain of our separation, and the lessons I had learned. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. My daughter had erased me from her life to pursue a marriage that ultimately brought her misery. It left me questioning why both she and my husband had made such destructive choices, despite the sacrifices I had made for them. Now, I see that the only person truly living the life I envisioned is me. This experience taught me a valuable lesson. No matter how strong your relationships may seem, you must prioritize your own well-being. Betrayal can come from anyone, but the one person who should never betray you is yourself. Happiness, I've learned, doesn't come from the sacrifices you make for others, but from the efforts you invest in fulfilling your own life. My story may seem like a tale of a life half-lived, but I'm determined to fill the rest of it with experiences and joys meant solely for me. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings insight and encourages you to cherish your happiness and dreams. Let's cheer each other on toward a life fully lived.
The young woman stood next to the crib, peering at the sleeping baby. She couldn't bear the child and was ready to lose her cool. Of course, she didn't mean to harm the baby, but Sophia was quite fed up, especially with her mind clouded by alcohol. This child served as a painful reminder that her husband had been married before, and this baby was the result of their past love. Sophia felt anger every time she looked at the child, but she had no choice but to endure Christina's antics, even though she didn't want to. Sophia wished for her own kids as son or daughter with Adrian, and she didn't care about what would happen to Christina. Frustrated, Sophia left the nursery for the kitchen, where she received a message from her spouse and started setting the table. She prepared a meal and brewed some coffee while glancing out the window. Soon, his car appeared, and she flinched, unsure why she reacted that way. She had been anticipating this moment to have a much-needed conversation. Sophia had tried to start this conversation before, but fear always held her back. She was afraid that if she gave him an ultimatum, her or the girl, he might leave her. She didn't want to share a roof with his child from his previous marriage, even though she had no connection to the girl. Adrian entered the apartment, shaking off the snow from his coat, which instantly melted onto it. He was covered in snow, even though it was only a short walk from the car to the entrance. After removing his boots, he went straight to the shower to warm up. And when he emerged, he changed into fresh clothes and made his way to the kitchen. Sitting down at the table, Adrian appeared far from cheerful. In fact, he had been in a sour mood lately, with work problems piling up and affecting his family life. He glanced at his wife, knowing she was about to start an uncomfortable conversation that wouldn't make him happy. Adrian brought the coffee closer and took a sip, immediately noticing she'd forgotten the sugar. She sat across from him, looking at him as if he should have known what this conversation would be about. "Adrian, we're a young family. We should live on our own," she said, addressing her husband. She wanted him to make the decision himself and desperately hoped he'd agree to take care of the girl somehow, even if it meant not having children of their own. She just wanted to be alone with Adrian and get rid of the constant reminder of his late wife. "Really, Adrian, we should have our own children or just be a couple. She's a complete stranger to me. Why do we need someone else's child in our home? You don't even deal with her. You don't interact or communicate with her at all. Why should I be the one dealing with it?" she pressed, urging him to see her perspective. Adrian replied calmly, "Well, let's start with the fact that you're a woman." He felt anger brewing inside him, irritated by his wife's repeated conversations on this topic. It seemed she would continue until the very end. He continued, "Why do I have to listen to all this right now? You stay home all day, and I provide for you. All you're required to do is clean the house, cook meals, and take care of the child. That's it. Instead of saying thank you for my constant hard work, I have to listen to your complaints." Sophia, exasperated, retorted, "Yeah, whatever, Adrian. What complaints? I just want us to be a happy family, not like we took in a girl no one wants. I'd understand if you actually cared for her, spent time with her. But you brought her home like a pet, and I'm stuck dealing with her." Sophia calmly expressed her frustration, though there were hints of tension in her voice, like she was on the edge of losing her cool. She had promised herself to keep the conversation civil this time, hoping to avoid the outbursts that hadn't worked in the past. She was desperate to get the girl out of their house. Their talk grew louder and more intense, and the little girl, whom Sophia thought was asleep, was actually wide awake. She cracked her door open and overheard the heated discussion in the kitchen. Quietly, she dialed her father's sister's number, which she had memorized. Her aunt had made her remember it for moments like this. As Christina spoke to her aunt, Carolina, on the phone, she shared what was happening at home. Carolina listened carefully, but had her own thoughts in mind. She assured the little girl that she would handle everything and told her not to worry. Carolina also instructed Christina to delete the call from the phone to keep it a secret. Christina hung up, erased the call, and returned to her room, still hearing her parents argue in the kitchen. She didn't understand her place in their lives. She loved her mom dearly, but she wasn't there anymore. All she had was her dad, who seemed indifferent, and her stepmother, who couldn't stand her. In her room, Christina tried to distract herself, clutching her favorite toy her mom had given her. She tried to fall asleep, all the while hearing her parents' unpleasant conversation in the background. The discussion in the kitchen continued, causing discomfort for everyone involved. The man grew increasingly irritated. After a long and exhausting day at work, he just wanted peace and a quiet evening, free from arguments. He couldn't care less about what Sophia wanted to discuss. But Sophia was determined to finish the conversation, stating, "Adrian, you said you loved me when we got together, and you promised there would be no mention of the past. Instead, you brought a girl into our home. I want you to understand that she doesn't belong here. Can't you see it? What will become of her as she grows up? Do you know what happens to girls who live in a family where they're unwanted? They end up pregnant at 15. I don't want her burdening us with a child in the future because that's what will happen. She's not needed here. Don't your late wife's relatives have someone who could take her in?" Adrian was surprised that Sophia hadn't erupted into hysteria yet. The conversation continued, and she remained composed. Evidently, this talk was truly significant to her. "I'm her father, so it's my responsibility to take care of her. But I don't have time because I work. You're a woman. It's your job to take care of the kids. Besides, I'm not interested in having more children. So, if you want kids, we won't have any more together. You already have a child," Adrian replied somewhat rudely. He grabbed his plate of food and retreated to the living room, turning on the TV to drown out his wife's words. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sophia sat at the table, her face buried in her hands. She had hoped this conversation would change things, but deep down, she knew it wouldn't. Time had passed, and her attempts to break through this wall had failed. She glanced at her husband, who shook his head in disagreement. Feeling defeated, she stood by the doorway, wondering if she would ever succeed. The answer eluded her. Cleaning up the kitchen, she put away the food and then went to bed, wrapping herself in a blanket and quickly falling asleep. Late into the night, the man sat on the couch, haunted by his wife's words echoing in his mind. He partly agreed with her. The girl wasn't wanted in their home. Yet, he couldn't just send her away to an orphanage. Days passed, marked by a biting cold that arrived unexpectedly early. Winter had come with a fierce chill, freezing everything in its grasp. The man kissed his wife goodbye and ventured into the snowstorm, bundling up against the icy winds. His wife watched, worried about his journey. Lately, she'd have been preoccupied with thoughts of his ex-wife's fate, a tragic car accident that left him with their daughter. The girl's presence in their home irked Sophia. She and her husband had agreed to send her away to a boarding school once she grew older. But Sophia didn't want to wait. Frustrated, she poured herself wine, trying to cope with the situation. Meanwhile, the little girl, half awake, stumbled in the dark, knocking over a glass and Sophia's favorite mug. Sophia's temper flared unexpectedly. She scolded the girl, her anger boiling over. Eventually, in her frustration, she locked the girl out on the icy balcony, leaving her alone in the freezing night. The little girl was only wearing a thin tank top, and in that cold weather, she quickly felt the freezing chill. What happened next is too scary to even think about. Adrian had a really tough day at work that drained him emotionally. To cope, he met up with an old friend, went to a bar, danced with young girls, and only after that did he go home. It felt like a little break, a sigh of relief. His exhaustion had built up so much that he couldn't see anything around him. Work, constant fights with his bosses, pending projects. It was overwhelming. Tired, he looked around. The snow-covered city made him feel sad. He longed for the time when he was married, working from home, his ex-wife taking care of the child, bringing him sandwiches while he worked. They used to sit on the balcony in the evenings, wrapped in blankets, sipping coffee while the little one slept in the cradle. But after his wife's death, he stopped feeling anything for the little girl. It was as if all his emotions towards her vanished. The car was parked near the entrance, but he couldn't bring himself to get out. He wished he could go back to the past, to be happy again. He loved his ex-wife deeply, mourned her when she passed, and that pain lingered within him. He finally got out of the car, entered the building, climbed the stairs to the apartment, and went inside. When Adrian returned from work, he saw a horrifying scene. The living room was in shambles. His intoxicated wife and her friend lay on the couch, but their child was nowhere to be found. The balcony door was wide open. Panicked, Adrian rushed to the balcony and saw small footprints and abandoned shoes. He shook his wife, trying to get answers, but she was unresponsive. He closed the balcony door, feeling a mix of shock and confusion. Adrian decided not to take any drastic steps until his wife sobered up. He forced her into a cold shower, gave her coffee, and repeated the process until she could talk properly. She was shivering and still couldn't explain what had happened. He left his wife alone and returned to the living room, leaving her with her friend. Adrian was shocked by what had happened. He couldn't sleep until 4 a.m., realizing he had to work the next day, or rather that day. He kept wondering where his daughter could be. Sophia could only speak clearly by 6 in the morning. Adrian couldn't fathom why she felt so terrible. He was afraid to imagine the mess they had gotten into. Sophia said his sister had taken little Christina. Adrian froze, not understanding why Caroline was involved. Without dealing with his wife, he quickly got ready and went to work. Throughout the day, he couldn't shake the need to visit Caroline and have a proper conversation with her. After work, despite the heavy snowfall, Adrian drove to his sister's place at the other end of the city. He parked near her familiar house, knocked on the gate, shivering in the cold. Caroline appeared at the doorstep, a beautiful young woman with long braided hair. She led her brother inside, and he explained he couldn't stay long due to the snow. Adrian questioned why Caroline had taken Christina in the first place. She told him that a few days ago, Christina had called her, saying her stepmother was tormenting her. When Caroline arrived, she found the girl in a terrible state because Sophia had put her on the icy balcony in just a tank top. Caroline quickly took Christina to the hospital, wrapping her in a fur coat to warm her up. Meanwhile, Sophia was busy getting drunk with her friend, completely unaware of what was happening. The doctor assured them that Christina would be fine, but they needed to keep her under observation due to severe hypothermia. Caroline couldn't understand Adrian's calm reaction. She was furious that he hadn't protected his daughter. A real father, she thought, would have confronted his wife for nearly killing their child. Despite her frustration, Adrian didn't say anything, leaving his sister to question his lack of action. He told his sister, "I even agreed that we would send her to a boarding school once she reached school age, but apparently she decided not to wait. We understand that we don't need her," Adrian said honestly. Carolina was shocked but chose not to argue. She changed the subject, deciding that if Adrian didn't want the girl, she would raise her herself. She found herself in a similar situation in her own childhood when she was unwanted by her family. Adrian came back home the next day after work, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He looked at his wife, who was clearly worried about him. They hugged each other in the hallway, and she confessed her love for him. They spent a lovely evening together, talking, watching TV, and eventually making love before falling asleep. Carolina, on the other hand, stood outside the hospital, waiting for her niece. When she saw Christina being brought towards her, she entered the building. She signed the necessary papers, picked up the little girl, and carried her to the car. Christina felt safe with her aunt, not her stepmother, and began crying when she thought about going back. Carolina reassured her, saying they wouldn't return to her stepmother and father. She explained that they had decided not to take her, and she was going to be her legal guardian. Christina smiled, relieved and happy. Carolina felt a warm glow in her heart seeing the girl's happiness. In the following weeks, Carolina finalized the paperwork, becoming Christina's legal guardian. Her brother, Adrian, gladly handed over guardianship, even sending money as child support. He was willing to pay any amount as long as he didn't have to take care of the girl. In just 6 months, Christina started calling Carolina Mom. They built a life together, facing challenges but also learning from each other. Carolina helped Christina learn basic skills, and the little girl quickly became independent. She went to daycare happily, and they lived together, practically inseparable. Despite occasional disagreements, Carolina cherished the little girl and loved her dearly. The past didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Christina was safe and happy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Betty, and I'd like to share a personal story with you. My mother-in-law, Madison, wasn't always the superficial and self-centered person she appears to be today. According to my husband, Edward, her transformation occurred later in life. Edward grew up in humble circumstances. His world changed drastically when he lost his father at the age of 5, leaving Madison to become the sole provider. Despite the challenges, she rose to the occasion, ensuring they had a stable, albeit modest, life. This resilience makes her current behavior even more striking. Through sheer determination and brilliance, Edward earned a full scholarship to medical school and eventually became a respected doctor. Despite his professional success, he remains grounded, a trait I deeply admire. However, Madison's lifestyle shifted dramatically after Edward's career took off. She embraced luxury, a far cry from the humble life they once shared. To give some context about myself, I am not currently employed, though I will explain why later. However, this does not mean I am financially unstable or reliant on others. Unfortunately, my first meeting with Madison got off to a rocky start due to her harsh misjudgment of my appearance and demeanor. When we met, her reaction was anything but welcoming. "Edward, is this the girl you've been excited about?" she questioned, scrutinizing me. "She looks so ordinary and unremarkable. Why her? Does she even work?" In that moment, Madison unfairly branded me as a potential gold digger, assuming I had ulterior motives for being with Edward. Her comments cut deeply, creating a tense dynamic from the start. Despite Edward's efforts to defend me, the encounter escalated into a heated argument. Eventually, we left, and during the drive home, Edward apologized for his mother's behavior. He admitted she had overstepped her boundaries and tried to reassure me. "She's changed," Edward explained. "She's not the person she used to be. Please don't take her words to heart." Although his words were comforting, the thought of maintaining a relationship with Madison felt daunting. However, as Edward's only remaining parent, I knew cutting ties completely wasn't a practical solution. "I'm not asking you to be friends with her," Edward said gently, "but could you try to be civil?" Reluctantly, I agreed to be respectful, though I doubted Madison would return the favor. "Don't worry, Betty," he reassured me. "If she steps out of line again, we'll reassess how we handle things. I love my mom, but I love you too, and I won't let her mistreat you." Even with Edward's support, I remained uneasy about my relationship with Madison. 4 years later, Edward and I got married in a simple courthouse ceremony, largely due to financial constraints. Edward was still supporting Madison, sending her a significant portion of his income each month for so-called emergencies. This practice continued after our marriage, putting the strain on our own finances. I never interfered with Edward's decision to support his mother, believing it was his right and responsibility. However, Madison's behavior became increasingly problematic. She often spoke negatively about me to her friends, spreading rumors that painted me as a gold digger. At first, I tried to ignore the slander, but it began to damage my reputation. Despite Edward's best efforts to mediate, Madison remained cold and distrustful. She was convinced I wasn't a suitable match for her son and treated me with disdain and suspicion. The ongoing tension made me question how long we could sustain this fragile family dynamic. Then, one day, Edward shared unexpected news. Madison wanted to invite me to a small gathering she was planning. Given her clear dislike for me, I was skeptical of her sudden change of heart. Edward, however, reassured me. "She wants to make amends," he said confidently. "She's trying to turn over a new leaf." Although I harbored doubts about Madison's intentions, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Edward was hopeful this could be a step toward repairing our strained relationship, and I wanted to approach the situation with an open mind. As the party date approached, I waited for more details from Madison with a mixture of eagerness and apprehension. Then the next day, Madison sent me a text. Assuming she was confirming the invitation, I opened it with cautious optimism. Her message began with a casual mention of the venue, a renowned 5-star hotel that was the talk of the town. She described the glamorous event she was hosting for 21 guests, proudly detailing how fabulous it would be. Feeling uncertain, I asked if I was still invited, based on what Edward had told me. Madison's response left me stunned. With an air of arrogance, she clarified that I was not invited. She emphasized the exclusivity of the event, the prestige of her guests, and her family's supposed wealth, making it clear that I wasn't part of her plans. I was humiliated and confused. Edward had been so sure she was extending an olive branch, yet here I was, excluded and belittled. Though hurt, I knew I had to maintain my composure. I calmly responded to Madison, explaining the misunderstanding, but her reply was patronizing. She suggested I couldn't possibly comprehend the complexities of organizing an event of such high caliber. Faced with her disdain, I chose to preserve my dignity, acknowledging her message without engaging further. After Madison's dismissive reply, I made it clear I had no interest in attending the gathering where I wasn't welcome. Rather than soften her tone, Madison doubled down, flaunting her supposed status and exclusivity. Though I felt a strong urge to respond in anger, I decided against it. Instead, I chose not to share the upsetting exchange with Edward and waited for the day of the party to pass. On the day of the event, Madison, seemingly oblivious to the emotional toll her words had caused, sent me a photo of herself and her friends dressed in lavish designer outfits. She later posted boastful updates on social media, highlighting the elegance of their evening. I ignored it all, focusing on my work and patiently waiting to see how things would unfold. About 2 hours later, I received an unexpected call from my father, which brought a surprising twist to the story. Here's something I hadn't shared widely. My father owns the very hotel where Madison was hosting her party, a fact she was unaware of. 4 years ago, I inherited a substantial sum from my grandfather, which I invested in my father's business. As a result, I now receive a share of the profits from the hotel and other family-owned enterprises. Despite my comfortable financial situation, I've always preferred to maintain a low profile, which is why Madison had no idea about my connection to the venue. My father's call revealed another layer of irony. Madison and her friends, oblivious to the high costs associated with such a luxurious venue, had racked up a bill of $4,000. After enjoying their extravagant evening, they requested a 60% discount, claiming they were short on cash. My father, aware of the situation and having heard complaints from staff about Madison's group being rude and entitled, sought my advice on how to handle it. As he described the scenario, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony. Madison, who had used the party to flaunt her supposed superiority, couldn't afford the event she had so proudly hosted. I shared my frustrations with my father, recounting how Madison had demeaned me while unknowingly hosting her event at my family's property. The situation felt like an unexpected poetic form of retribution for her earlier behavior. As my father and I discussed Madison's ostentatious display and the burdens she and her guests had placed on the staff, he fully grasped the irony of the moment. Together, we decided how to address the issue in a way that would both uphold the hotel's policies and serve as a quiet, meaningful lesson for Madison. Half-jokingly, I suggested to my dad that Madison and her entourage could make amends by washing dishes and cleaning the restaurant floors, considering their disrespectful behavior toward the staff. While the idea carried a hint of poetic justice, it also presented an opportunity to teach a lesson in humility and respect. My dad, amused by the suggestion, playfully added that if Madison escalated the matter, involving the authorities was always an option, though we hoped it wouldn't come to that. He chuckled at my suggestion, giving it an enthusiastic endorsement, and even joked about documenting the moment with photos. What started as a fan comment soon turned into reality. About an hour later, my dad sent me pictures of Madison and her friends, visibly humbled, washing dishes and mopping the restaurant floors. When Madison realized my dad was the owner of the hotel, her attitude initially shifted to one of relief, assuming her connection to him would get her out of the predicament. However, to her shock, my dad insisted she and her guests take responsibility for their actions. Temporarily dumbfounded, Madison protested, but my dad reminded her firmly that since she didn't consider me family, she couldn't expect familial courtesies either. The irony of the situation was undeniable. While part of me regretted not witnessing the scene in person, the photos were proof enough of the day's unexpected turn. Later that evening, Edward came home visibly unsettled. It was clear Madison had reached out to him, likely providing a skewed version of the events. He approached me with concern, asking about the claim that his mother had been forced to clean at the restaurant. I knew I needed to tread carefully, balancing my desire for vindication with the importance of preserving my relationship with Edward. Calmly, I explained the situation in full detail, emphasizing that what had happened was a natural consequence of Madison's behavior. I outlined how Madison had come to her family-owned hotel, racked up a $4,000 bill, claimed she could only pay $2,000, and harassed the staff throughout the event. Her ostentatious party had turned into an absolute nightmare for everyone involved, and my dad's actions were entirely justified. Edward, clearly stunned, asked about the details of the gathering, including the guests and what they had ordered. I explained that, contrary to what Madison had told him, she hadn't brought just 5 people. She had brought 21 guests who had indulged in the most expensive items on the menu. Edward was speechless. Madison had not only misled him about the guest list, but she had also lied about inviting me, claiming I had declined. The truth left him grappling with a mix of frustration and disbelief as the dynamics of the situation became clearer to him. I corrected Edward by showing him the text messages from Madison, which clearly demonstrated I was never genuinely invited to her event. At his request, I also provided the restaurant bills and shared the full text exchanges. To substantiate the costs further, my father sent him receipts, and I showed Edward photos of Madison's lavish party. As Edward reviewed the evidence, his initial disbelief turned to anger. Without hesitation, he called Madison to confront her about the glaring discrepancies in her story. Madison attempted to downplay the situation, claiming she had only mentioned being short on cash and accusing me of twisting the story to sabotage her. Edward wasn't buying it. He pointed out the inconsistencies between her words and the evidence and reminded her of the insult she had thrown my way, saying I wasn't classy enough to attend her event. Madison tried to dismiss her remark as a harmless joke, but Edward remained unconvinced. He pressed her on her irresponsible spending, especially since it was coming out of his pocket, and criticized her for insulting his wife while wasting money on her friends. Madison scrambled to justify her actions, but Edward's profound disappointment was unmistakable. "Mom," he said firmly, "I made a mistake by always giving you money whenever you needed it. But guess what? That ends now." Desperate, Madison protested. "Edward, you've been so supportive all this time. You can't just stop now. It was just a one-time mistake. Why are you overreacting?" "No, Mom," Edward retorted, his voice steady with resolve. "This isn't just a one-time mistake. If you can't even consider my wife as family, then I don't want anything to do with you. I always hoped you'd change your attitude, but you haven't. I'm not going to keep funding your lifestyle while you insult my wife and call her classless. This ends now." Edward didn't wait for a response. He hung up, blocked her number, and turned to me, his demeanor softening. He apologized profusely for doubting me initially and for not understanding the full extent of the situation sooner. I forgave him, appreciating that he had stood up for me when it mattered most. We had a serious discussion about Madison and decided that, for now, it was best to distance ourselves from her. Edward, though wealthy, remained humble and found his mother's behavior unacceptable. I agreed wholeheartedly, feeling both validated and relieved by his unwavering support. Together, we resolved to remove the negativity she brought into our lives. A few days later, the gravity of her actions began to dawn on Madison. Realizing she might have irreparably harmed her relationship with Edward, she panicked. However, the decision had been made. For us, it marked a new beginning, free from the strain and tension her presence had caused. With Edward ceasing financial support, Madison's lifestyle changed drastically. Accustomed to a high-end existence funded largely by Edward's generosity, she suddenly struggled to maintain her standard of living. Despite having a job, her earnings were insufficient to cover the opulent expenses she was used to. She eventually had to terminate her lease on her condo and move into a modest one-bedroom apartment, where budgeting for basic necessities became her new reality. Madison frequently emailed us about her financial difficulties, downplaying her past behavior and accusing us of overreacting. It was clear she wasn't ready to fully acknowledge her role in the estrangement. Meanwhile, Edward redirected his financial support toward my father's business, investing in the expansion of his hotel and restaurant ventures. We had aspirations to grow the business into larger cities, though those plans are still in the early stages. Amid these changes, life brought us unexpected joy. I discovered I was pregnant. Edward and I are thrilled and have been busy preparing for our new arrival. With a baby on the way, I'm relieved that our child will be shielded from the negativity Madison once brought into our lives. Should Madison ever wish to be part of our child's life, I am determined to ensure she does not impart any harmful influences. For now, we are focused on welcoming our child into a loving and stable environment, free from shallow or disruptive behavior. We appreciate any well wishes as we embark on this exciting journey of parenthood, determined to provide the best for our child.